Hi everyone, I'm KeithDeStone and I'm here again with Greg Nagy and Arin and Claudia and Sarah and Hélène, and today Lenny can join us as well. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation with all of you about heroes and about the Oresteia of Aeschylus, those three tragedies that belong together. And I wanted to start off with some fun Halloween slides, since this often comes around during Halloween season that we talk about these three tragedies that go together. I've put together a few slides that I collected when I was walking around. I think it was Somerville and Cambridge in those days. Let's see if I can share this and tell me how it's coming through. I'm going to run the presentation. Can you still see the slide now? Now that it's full screen, I think. Great. So here's a fun little title. I think, Greg, this is your wording actually from another day of teaching.
Yes.
Here we go. So what's the point? These slides are fun to think with. We're not making any argument that current American Halloween practices have any relationship to the continuity of tradition with ancient Greece. But what do we see here? We see rest in peace. Rest in peace. Well, that's a nice wish. Hopefully so. Hopefully the dead rest in peace. But
Yeah.
we know that heroes don't always rest peacefully. They have unfinished business that brings them back out of the grave to menace the unjust and so forth. Oh yeah, this is one of my favorites. Knock 3 times to wake me. I think I have a close up actually, because I love the worded messages here. Rituals of approaching heroes. You have to do it the right way. Knock 3 times to wake me up. That's the instruction. We've learned that there are rituals associated with worshiping heroes. It's grim below. Well, okay, fair enough. I'll be back. Talked about that already. The hero can be reactivated for good or for ill, depending on who's there. I'm gonna get you. Well, that's a message for those who have been naughty. Monster party here. Another pointer for me to ritual realities. Feasting goes along with worshiping heroes, and you're partying with the dead. That's my message when I have taught this material. Is these heroes they're all in the past, even though they continue to exist in other ways. And what I think this is the last one. This goes back to, well, who do we know as a famous lyre player? I'm pretending this guitar is a lyre. Achilles. This is my Achilles and Patroclus moment. They're sitting in the tent when the emissaries find them. Patroclus is waiting for his turn. All right. Enough of that.
That's beautiful, Keith. And this brings back so many happy memories when you and I were fellow teachers in a college level course on heroes.
That's right.
And then you have so much experience also in what is called in some communities extension school. And there are other words for it, like continuing education. And that's such an important part um, of the educational mission of everybody, whether they are learners or teachers. I think of everybody as learners more than teachers, because the less hierarchical we are, the better. And um, and you, of course, are Keith, are good friends with Arin, who is a successor of yours in wearing the hat of a college level teacher of um, ancient Greek heroes and what they're all about. And I'm sure that Claudia, who is a former student of Lenny, who is a contemporary in age, but who I think, like me, is such a um, wonderful communicator, and who is so young at heart, despite the fact that he's almost as old as I am.
I've got more white hair than you.
And then there are the amazing Hélène and Sarah, who um, are representatives of yet another phase of our intergenerational engagement. And I think of a set of initials that we don't use anymore, MOOC, which used to be Massive Open Online Course. But Sarah and Hélène and Claudia, who was definitely a part of this project, and Lenny, of course, and of course, indirectly, Keith and Arin, we were allergic to the word course, so we called it conversation. But just for the fun of it, if I could call on my most recent partner in trying to communicate, and that's our dear Arin, who is in a sense represents the the spiritually but also chronologically youngest phase of our intergenerational efforts, is how did you react, dear Arin, to our wonderful Keith's medley of Americana and, shall we say, quote unquote, carnival?
Well, I also just adore Halloween. So, on a surface level, really enjoy always seeing Halloween decorations. It's probably my favorite holiday. Um, I love horror movies. I love this time of year. And so for me, just on a surface level, it's always really enjoyable to see that. But I also love, I'm always looking for ways to make content approachable and make it more accessible and make it relatable for the students. And so I really enjoyed the tombstones where you were speaking about, the ritual aspect and you have to do the correct things. Because I think that's something that's a little difficult for our students to grasp in general is, but what would they do? Why do they have to know it? What is the purpose, etc. And so I think that's a really fun bridge for our students. My goodness. Sorry.
Oh, and
Speaking of Halloween, my black cat decided to make an appearance. Hello. But I think that's a really fun way to make it approachable for the students. It's something that they're more familiar with, and that's always something that I'm on the lookout for, is something to help bridge some of these connections, to help them understand what it is we're trying to teach them in a way that is fun, is memorable, that makes sense to them. And so I really enjoyed your slides on both of those levels, on a fun level and as a pedagogy level.
Couldn't hope for anything more. You said it so well. So
You're just trying to dominate the conversation today, Alucard.
and do you want to tell everybody why your cat is called what the cat is called, the black cat?
Yes. So my black cat is his name is Alucard, Alucard, and it is Dracula spelled backwards. There's some folklore myths out there where Dracula had a son that he named Alucard, and my husband is a fan of those myths, and so we named our black cat Alucard, and he loves to join our conversations.
And Claudia, as somebody who as a college student was learning together with Lenny, and again, it wasn't so much. I just know you two so well. It wasn't so much Lenny the teacher and Claudia the student, but your experiences with Aeschylus and the Oresteia trilogy. Some people are allergic to saying trilogy. I don't mind. But I bet you have intergenerational reactions to everything that Keith and Arin have been talking about.
Yeah, not so much about those things, but my real memory of beginning tragedy in a classroom with Lenny was we started off Lenny said, "Okay, what's everything we know about tragedy?" I don't, Lenny, do you remember this part? And you would have us all say all the things we thought we knew, and then we put them on the board, and we put a big X to it, like, no, that's real. So it was just a great it was a great opening because it just got you very engaged and got you super curious. And of course, I'm sure we immediately turned to the text. And I'm trying to think. I don't think I read these texts with you, Lenny. I think we read other things.
Yeah,
But
we were,
as a reading list, maybe I did these with you. But yeah, Lenny, for sure, it's a fun classroom, and I think it's a great turning point for all the people in our community who have been following us along, because we're really going to be thinking about the way that the concept of the hero are, I guess, being used by let's say maybe the Athenian Empire, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yes.
now it's really being filtered through that. Um, so Lenny, do you want to talk a little bit about? I remember you talking a little bit about this idea of empire um, and tragedy, right? Am I
Yeah, I
remembering?
mean, I think I mean, what Greg has written about these things is so amazing. But I mean, when we did talk about tragedy, one of the big problems we always had was that students came to tragedy with the idea, they learned something that they pronounced in various ways, hamartia, or a tragic error, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
they were always reading the plays to find out what the tragic flaw of the hero was that was going to bring about his downfall. And so we'd all be glad and clapping that vengeance was served. Okay, and so it was a huge effort to try and get people to think the way out of that. And this seeing it in the context of hero cult, which is what we're doing today, is just a perfect way to cut that off at the starting point and to understand in a beautifully culturally wedded way what's going on, right? So, and then the other thing that I always think of learning that I learned from Greg, which since we're talking about learning from teachers, and Greg was my teacher, he calls me his colleague, but anyhow, was about how the Athenian Empire, in the context of the Athenian Empire, the Athenians tried to take over the kind of role that Pan-Hellenism had played in an earlier stage of Greek culture. They tried to be imperialist about the mythological and cultural heritage of the Greeks. And tragedy is the centerpiece of that, I think. In the tragic in the festival of Dionysia, all the members of the all the Athenian client states were seated in the front row, and the tribute that they paid to Athens was exhibit number one and stuff like that. So this is really politically wedded ritual to the performance of myth in a city-state context, in the context of the polis. So that's the amazing thing about how all this works out. Yeah, maybe you could say more about that, Greg. Yeah.
Well, you inspire me, dear Lenny, to call on. I sometimes refer to you two friends, Sarah and Hélène, as the muses. Um, and I'm thinking of your experience, the two of you, when you first started interacting with the HeroesX group, and where the MOOC was not massive open online course, but massive open online conversation, I think was your favorite word. And so I have a suggestion, since the aspect of what we were doing together, that was the conversation, not so much the course. People like Arin and I are still trying to do when we have to deal with real courses where people are registered and where people have to worry about their status as a student, and where Arin and I have to worry about our status as teachers, and we're trying to be intergenerational. No, we're all learning together. And so Arin has a set of slides which are technically classroom oriented, but they're really oriented, dear Lenny, uh, with the um, with the book published originally in 2013, The Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours. And what Arin and I did just the other day is show slides that were pioneered by by, for example, Claudia, and then Keith, and then Arin. So it's a joint effort, but it's technically classroom slides, but in reality, it's HeroesX slides. And we call them slides because um, Arin does PowerPoint. I can't even do PowerPoint, but do you think you could share, dear Arin, the screen, and then we could just show people what kinds of words we projected? And I'm thinking, wouldn't it be fun if Sarah and Hélène were the primary commentators, especially for the key words, is because this will, I think, dear Sarah and Hélène, evoke memories of maybe the first time that we in HeroesX, and I say we, this community of learners, were learning with you and maybe your first time. So you could even pretend to be first time MOOCs. Wouldn't that be fun? So now, Arin, can you do technological magic, or can Claudia and Keith help you? Oh, there it is. Perfect. Oh boy. So let's see. Why don't you take over, dear Arin, and call on our conversation participants, and I'm thinking especially of Hélène and Sarah, but also all the rest of us intergenerational types, and who knows, I might drop in here and there. But first word to the muses. What are the muses? What are the muses saying?
One of the things
When I think about Ate, I think of Agamemnon
Yes.
because because he's always trying to avoid taking responsibility for his acts.
Yes.
So he's always blaming. Oh, it's because of Ate, you know. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind when when I see the word Ate.
I love it. I love it. How about you? How about you, Sarah?
Well, I think one of the key things which was a surprise to me with Ate, I got the idea of this sort of veering off course, things going wrong. But then there's also that flip side of it, which is the results from that, which is some sort of punishment for it, or the result caused by the actions. So cause and effect and cause,
Yeah.
kind of circling round on itself.
And you know what, dear Sarah, this is my opportunity. I'm going to play just exceptionally the role of teacher, and Lenny will play exceptionally the role of student. So student Lenny, what is this hamartia?
Yeah.
We just talked about it a minute ago.
So it's certainly semantically related to ate, right? Because it means you translated an error, but it means missing, veering off course, missing the mark in a when you're shooting an arrow and stuff like that, right, Greg?
Exactly.
Have I learned my lesson correctly?
I love it. And you notice I even have flaw with quote unquote. Maybe dear Arin, you should take over, because I'm almost taking over as teacher, but you play the teacher now.
Well, I'm
look.
just going to bring up our very next slide where we actually bring up this exact point as
Okay.
well. And this is something that we bring up with the students to try to help them differentiate between ate and hamartia. But I think this is also, as we've been saying, it's something, the inclination, especially when we get into tragedy, especially with Agamemnon, is to try to figure out what is his flaw, what is the error. There's always blame being placed. And I'm not sure that that's exactly, I don't think it's entirely the student's fault, because that is exactly what the Furies are doing. They're placing blame. And so I think they're reading into those texts a bit, but this is definitely, they've experienced this before through the Iliad and have brought up Ate before, but they're always trying to assign some sort of blame. They're always trying to figure out who's at fault here.
Well, you know what might be fun is before we leave this slide, um, yesterday when Arin and I were riffing with each other about these two words, I said to the people who were listening, wow, you thought you left the Iliad as we now go from epic to tragedy, but you'll never leave the Iliad. And I reminded people of Iliad 19, where Agamemnon, who is such an unlikable character, but as Aristotle teaches us in the Poetics, and as Lenny has just taught us, hamartia, which is the word that Aristotle uses, is just as much a matter of plot as it is a matter of character. So for Aristotle's Poetics, at least the way he wrote things up then in the 4th century, in a sense, plot drives character as much as character drives plot, maybe even more so. And so given that, when Agamemnon says in this reconciliation scene, quote unquote reconciliation scene in Iliad 19, okay, Achilles, I'm sorry, I guess. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Oh, yeah, right. But it wasn't my fault. It was the fault of Ate. And you know, Lenny, I'm now even more obsessed about this than ever, which is that it's nice that in English, when we write in English, we have uppercase letters and lowercase letters, something that was undreamed of in classical Greek times. And so when we want to say that somebody's a person, so let's suppose that Ate can be personified as a goddess. Oh, then we spell Ate with a capital A. That's a modernism, but it's kind of it's kind of helpful because when we spell Ate with a capital A, what we're trying to translate from the original Greek is, oh, in these contexts, Ate is personified. Personified as what? Well, let's listen to Agamemnon, and we don't have slide for that here, dear Arin. I know we didn't use that slide because what are we going to do? Switch slides, switch PowerPoints. But anyway, in Iliad 19, isn't it wonderful that he says that, oh, back in the day, we gods used to hang out with the goddess Ate, and Ate, as Hélène and Sarah pointed out so beautifully, Ate is cause and effect, and so you know, if something goes really wrong, if you personalize it, then that's easier to think of Ate as a cause rather than an effect, isn't it? At least for us. And so what happens is that back when Ate, the goddess, is held responsible for messing up for the big mess that Heracles, the greatest human who ever lived, the greatest mortal who ever lived, never gets to be king. And it's the machinations of Ate as the goddess that did it. So what does Zeus do? He expels Ate from Olympus. And so then we're stuck with Ate, and that's why things keep getting messed up for us, and we can never quite get things right. Or maybe we will in the future, and I'll call on Arin to talk about that. But let's say, you know, we can't get things right. But isn't it nice that here we are, 458 BCE? This is the time that we, the citizens of Athens and the allies, and maybe other people are attending tragedy. here we are, 458 BCE. We're attending the premiere of Aeschylus's three tragedies and one satyr drama, and there's the Agamemnon, and now the gods at Olympus are okay. They're not dysfunctional anymore as they were in the heroic age when even the gods were dysfunctional. They got rid of Ate, but we can't get rid of Ate unless we keep processing and processing and processing. Year after year at festivals like the city Dionysia, um, we process our own pollution and we hope to get less and less and less polluted. And remember, Arin, how you brought up so beautifully at that point. And I think it's because you're an Egyptologist, so you're very sensitive to ritual, that somehow if you keep on redoing myths on a seasonally recurring basis, if you keep on redoing myths ritualistically, then you get better and better, or so we hope. But you said it so much better to fellow learners yesterday. Arin, do you think you could conjure it up and say it again?
I will do my best.
No
I will
pressure.
do my best to recall what I said. Yeah, so we bring up this word that I know we will be returning to, especially when we discuss Sophocles next week. But I always bring up the word early to kind of seed it with the students, catharsis.
Yes, very good.
Because a lot of tragedy really is cathartic. And it always reminds me so much of my horror movies that I love so much and always watch so much this time of year. Because why do you keep watching these over and over? Why do you put yourself through this? And the horror movies are simply because I enjoy them. Personally. But the reference that I brought up, again, because I'm always looking for something to help bridge this gap for the students, is if any of them are familiar with the Passion of the Christ, or at least are vaguely familiar with the concept of Christian Easter, and how every year, and I grew up in the church, you go through the Monday, Thursday service where you discuss the Last Supper with Jesus and his final moments and his passing on to the disciples. And you have a Good Friday service where you discuss, the trial with Pontius Pilate and the crucifixion. And it's this whole intense, emotional 3 days of church over 4 days because you don't go on Saturday. And then Sunday is Easter and it's happy again. And you have to go through the ordeal, tangentially and from a viewer, a spectator view. You're not going through it yourself. And I don't know how other churches do it. I can only speak to the church that I grew up in, but it was always very intense emotion, especially that Black Friday service where they would literally, to make a point, they would slam the Bible shut and toss black cloth over everything to really drive home the impact of what happened 2000 years ago now. And we were going through this ritual with our pastor. We were reliving this ordeal some 2000 years later in order to come out the other side of it. And that's exactly what we see here with tragedy. It's a very similar sentiment. Different characters, different context, different viewpoints of religion. But it's the same sentiment. You go through the ordeal to come out the other side a little bit better.
And dear Arin, in the classics world, in the professional classics world, people, just fight like cats and dogs about whether catharsis, as it's pronounced in ancient Greek, but as we pronounce it, catharsis, whether it's medical or ritual. Well, it's both. It's both.
Yeah.
In the sense that, especially if you think of medicine in terms of the ancient world, purifying the body of pollution is both medical and ritual. And
you need
Lenny
to have both in tandem with each other.
Exactly. And I bet Lenny and Claudia can really relate to that.
Claudia, go ahead.
No. You, Lenny, please.
Oh, but I mean, yeah, the concept of disease is related to pollution, right? I mean, this is what it was, and this is Hippocrates tried to get it away from pollution, but he went in the wrong direction because he said it can't be that you catch a disease from somebody else, like you get pollution from somebody else. But I mean, the essential idea is that these two things are intimately related: healing and getting well from pollution. Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, we have so many great readers here. I'm wondering if we could, read together. Could we choose a focus passage and kind of look at these words in context and see how that conversation?
You know what, dear Claudia?
Yeah.
Arin has slides that have the text with a capital T that I use for hour 16 in ancient Greek hero in 24 hours. And these texts are keyed to the analysis I give there, where I've learned so much from people like Lenny and then from the next generation and the next generation. So as represented in this group here in our HeroesX meeting. So would it be okay if dear Claudia, if we call on Arin to show some of these texts?
Yeah, that is my great wish. I think it'll be a beautiful opportunity.
So how about that? Oh, look at this. Oh my goodness.
I like that we start with this one. I think it is my favorite because it really sets the scene for
Yes.
what's happening.
Can you tell them what we talked about yesterday?
Yeah. So this is the analogy where we are discussing the lion cub that is brought into the house, and I'm actually going to read it because I do just think it's such a lovely
Please.
passage. This is how it was when a man brought back home a lion cub and raised him. The lion cub was deprived of his mother's milk, yet still desiring the breast. Gentle he was in the preliminaries of his life, friendly to children, and a delight to the old. He was often cradled in the arms like some nursing child, with his bright eye toward the hand that held him. He was fawning, forced by the needs of his stomach to fawn, but then, brought to full growth in the course of time, he demonstrated the nature he had from his parents. Without being invited to do so, doing it as a compensation to those who fostered him, he prepared a feast, bringing disaster with sheep being slaughtered. And the house was defiled with blood. Those who lived there could not fight back their pain, and great was the destruction with much slaughter. He was something that comes from a god, some kind of a priest of disaster, as if he had been nurtured for that purpose, right inside the house.
Oh, do you like the way I capitalized the A of Ate here?
Which dovetails very nicely. I just really enjoy this passage because I think it really sets the scene, even though it is quite a bit later into the Agamemnon. I think this always helps contextualize because then the question comes up, who is the lion cub? And the answer is, well, it could be anybody in the trilogy. Right? We're having blood for blood and we're having revenge and we are having nature versus nurture. And it's a bloody, bloody tragedy.
Yes. And
I don't know if anyone else has additional thoughts on
yes,
this passage.
Arin, I wondered if could you go back to I think it's on the previous slide. As you were reading it, one of the keywords there that jumped out was charis, which is usually such a benevolent thing when we think about Homeric hymns and things like that. It's grace and gratification and so on and so forth. But here, tying it back into that priest of Ate personified, that charis is a much, as you said, Arin, a bloodier thing going on.
And dear Sarah, could I say that one thing that Arin and I were also talking about when we were looking at this text A with with, in this case, college students, is how important it is that the lion cub is almost humanized here. You don't ordinarily talk about lions having breasts, but or lions having a personality, so to speak. And here, it's clear that he is so humanized that it's almost like he were a human who is so grateful to the adoptive parents for adopting him. Mom and Dad, I'm so grateful to you, because charis also means gratitude on a very primal level. I'm so grateful to you. I'm going to throw a party for you. Well, if I were human, the party would involve, if it's very splurgy, sacrificing sheep, then dividing up the meat, then cooking the meat, and then having a wonderful party. And so, in a sense, the lion cub wants, almost as a quasi-human, to throw a party for the parents. But the trouble is, because he's a lion and he's going to grow up to be a lion, and in a sense, he's already grown up to be a lion. When the party happens, once the blood starts flowing, he's not thinking of cooking the meat and eating it. He's thinking of, wow, raw meat, this is exciting. And so, just as Sarah says, you now have the sort of horrifying image of a priest of Ate, a sort of deadly priest of utter destruction. And it's all blood, just as Arin said, and just as you say, dear Sarah. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. And what is the fatal flaw in the lion? Does the lion have the fatal flaw that everyone is always looking for when they come to these, these tragedies from a kind of a high school approach, I suppose? The lion is the lion. Like, what other gift does a lion have to give?
Exactly.
The flaw here is in the plot that brought all of these elements together.
Exactly. And the plot drives it. And then there's just nothing to be done about it. It cannot be remedied. Or can it? Or can it?
Can I ask, can we go back to the beginning of the passage, the part about being deprived of mother's milk?
Yeah.
That one. Never thought, I don't think I really saw that previously. I don't know, I just went right over it. But that's really interesting, Greg. Like, I'm thinking about how we started some of our discussions in the beginning of office hours. Some myths that are kind of related.
Yeah.
How could we be thinking about that in relation to some of the other narratives that we've talked about nurturing heroes and
Absolutely. And here I'm so grateful to the insights of a dear friend and colleague of Lenny's and myself, Laura Slatkin, who was one of the people who's very sensitive to the role of Thetis, the mother of Achilles, because we always talk about the anger of Achilles, yeah, but it turns out in the Iliad, it's very clear that when Thetis breastfed baby Achilles, her mother's milk, the mother's milk of Thetis, the goddess, because she's the immortal part of Achilles's genetic makeup, it was tainted, polluted with gall, with gall from the gallbladder. And how did she get gall in her mother's milk? It's because she, this goddess, had breastfed from the goddess Hera, whose right breast was wounded by a poison arrow. The poison was gall. And we went through this. We went through this chain, which is a cyclical chain, when we were meeting way back when we were still talking about the Iliad and what makes Achilles so angry, and how does that anger relate to the anger of Thetis, it turns out, and the even earlier anger of Hera. But how come it's all a vicious circle, so to speak? So I'm so glad, dear Claudia, that you pointed us to this detail. And then could I also say that in the original Greek, where it says, this is how, hutos, that's not all that interesting for us, but for speakers of ancient Greek, this kind of phraseology, hutos, is kind of like when we say in English, once upon a time. When you say that, you know you're going to deal with a so-called fairy tale, and the fairy tale has its own rules for what the plot of a fairy tale is. So in the original Greek, it's been proved by philologists that this expression hutos is the way you introduce a coded message. In Greek, that coded message would be called an ainos, A-I-N-O-S, which is a coded message because it's coded to be understood only by those who are mentally capable, who are morally capable, and emotionally capable. If you don't have those three prerequisites, you don't get it. And so here, the whole narrative, if you like, I'll call it myth, but myth in the sense of a cosmic truth. The narrative of the lion cub is something, just as Arin says, could apply almost to any character. And actually, some people say to every character, every major character in the three tragedies that we call the Oresteia trilogy. So thank you, Claudia, for that extra insight about, again, the humanizing or the temporary humanizing of the lion cub.
Can I ask a follow-up question? How do we want to be thinking about the embedding of this kind of narrative, the kind of narrative that starts with hutos in the world of tragedy, in the medium of tragedy, as opposed to the medium epic? Is that something we need to be thinking about? Is there a difference, or?
Well, you know what I said, and I hope that people weren't shocked when I said this, dear Arin, yesterday to very young people, to the students. I said, well, Aeschylus in 458 was still a social optimist. He really was very optimistic about the evolving democracy of the city-state of Athens. And it kind of shows as you go through the three tragedies, by the time you get to the Euminedes, it's pretty clear that there's hope for clearing of pollution, in a sense, the clearing of the poison, as in the gall that poisons the mother's milk. So everything is on the way to clearing. In 458, we're on the way. In the next year for City Dionysia, it'll even be better. It'll even be better the following year. And then I pointed out to the students, well, democracy had some really bad moments as we proceed. And actually, the other two tragedians, I pointed out, Sophocles and Euripides, get more and more pessimistic socially, so that by the time in real life you get to 403 BCE, you have absolute tyranny overthrowing democracy, and a lot of bloodshed of citizens. And Sophocles lived long enough to know about it, and so did Euripides. And so, of course, they're socially pessimistic. So I don't know. You see what I'm saying, dear Claudia? And I also mentioned, and this was the snarky part, where I said, well, even in the best times of democracy, people didn't have time anymore to sit and listen to 15,000 plus verses of the Homeric Iliad and 12,000 plus verses of the Odyssey on the feast of the birthday of Our Lady of Athens, Athena. They just didn't have time for it anymore. And so at the Pan-Athenic Festival, I'm pretty sure now, as I reconstruct it, in the middle of the 5th century, that is to say, in the glory days of Aeschylus, let's say 458 and thereabouts, by that time, Homeric poetry was not all that known to the Athenian public in this evolving democracy, because the democracy didn't have time to fit the entire Iliad and Odyssey into the feast of Our Lady of Athens, the Pan-Athenaea, which happened in what today would be late August. They just didn't have time. So guess what? Tragedy, shall we say, boils it down. I'm not saying it waters it down. It boils it down to the bare minimum. I mean, these tragedies take much a much shorter time, because democracy doesn't have time for Homer anymore, if I can put it crudely. Democracy has time only for tragedy, which is why, dear Arin, if you would go to the next text, I think it was where it says, I'm authorized to speak. I forget which slide it was.
Oh,
We had so
so
many fun
cool.
slides.
There's so much
Oh,
fun, I know.
oh God, keep going a little more. I think it's text C, it is. You know,
There it is.
there it is.
And
Thank you.
briefly, Greg, one thing I've been
Yes.
thinking on recently is this is something that I think is always a struggle to explain to anyone who isn't a historian or a classicist or an Egyptologist,
Yes.
because we're going over such a large scope of time,
Yes.
is that all of these texts are reflections of the sentiments in that moment. And this
Yes.
is something I was chatting with my students about yesterday, is we have to remember the length of time in between some of these, and that this is one person's impression of democracy. That's why Aeschylus is so, he's not pessimistic, right? He thinks it's going to get better. He thinks things
Yeah.
will work out and democracy will be great. And then the very next one that we read, we have to reinforce that there's a time skip. There's a
Yes.
break in time, and history has changed, and so now the sentiment is much more pessimistic.
Yes.
And this
Yes.
is something that I think can get a little lost sometimes as we go through these texts, because I have to remind my students there's hundreds of years between Homer and
No, yeah.
Aeschylus.
Yeah.
And there's even more time between Aeschylus and Sophocles to Euripides. And this
Even
is something
further
that
time,
I think
further
you really
time.
just brought up, is
Yeah.
they're reflections of society in that moment. So not only are we looking at different viewpoints of heroes, we're looking at how the hero shifted
Oh,
over
yeah.
time.
That's beautiful, Arin. And could I say that the way we're talking now about how democracy doesn't have time for epic anymore, but here in this passage, where I translate, I'm authorized to narrate, in the original Greek, Kyrios eimi throein, that is still the rhythm of Homeric poetry that professionals call dactylic hexameter. So this is the one time Aeschylus is saying, well, hello, this is epic, but it's epic that has been abridged for democracy, which doesn't have time anymore for full-fledged epic. Isn't that amazing? But you know what, dear friends, since I know that both Keith and Claudia are very conscious of time, and
Yes.
just as Arin and I were very conscious of time when we were doing on a Monday, we had done, quote unquote, done the Agamemnon, and then on a Wednesday we had done, quote unquote, the libation bearers and the Eumenides. And when Arin and I did, quote unquote, those other two tragedies, we barely had time to do enough of it. And so I want to make sure before Keith and Claudia pull the plug on today's wonderful session. I'm having such a good time reliving things. If maybe Arin, who knows what I tried to get through, what was it? Yesterday for Arin and me, when we were dealing with the college students, is no pressure. Do you want to say anything about how the trilogy, quote unquote, ends up, and how optimistic it is about democracy, and about how the quote unquote invention of trial by jury is going to be a remedy, a cure for the dysfunctional pollution of the heroic age, when people had vengeance, had vendettas, and they didn't have trial by jury. So decay was not absolute justice. Now we can aim at it better.
Arin, I
So
think I
I'm
have
gonna
something that will be a good segue for you. So
Oh,
I'll make a
please,
general
please,
remark here
please.
first, which
Yeah.
is a connection back to epic, which we never leave, as you said already, Greg. and a connection to the season of the year when we're recording this, which is Halloween. So far,
Yes,
what we see is the haunted house. So the end of the
yes,
Odyssey,
yes, yes,
the house is kind of haunted. Um,
yes,
Yes.
Odysseus comes back to set things right, as if he was returning from the dead, and he did visit the underworld.
yes,
He is coming back from the dead in a way.
yes, yes.
The house of Agamemnon, the house of Atreus, is haunted by this spirit, and later in text C, there's talk of a ghost, a treacherous keeper of the household, and this kind of thing,
Yeah.
the punishment,
Oh,
the wrath
yeah.
that is stored up. Yeah, that house is haunted. There was one other one I was going to mention.
Oh, can I mention this, dear Keith? You're so you're so on target. You're so
Was it
on target.
Protesilaus? I was going to maybe.
Well, yeah, there was that because there's that's such a good reminiscence of a hero cult that is already signaled in Iliad 2 in the part that everybody is impatient with, which is catalog of ships. But the reason that what you said is just so important and it's so timely is is exactly the connection of how this how this trilogy winds up with agenda that you already see in the Iliad. And this is cue for you, dear Arin, if you like. Or but I'll cue you in a strange way, which is we didn't get to mention to the college students yesterday. I didn't get to mention that followers of the philosopher Hegel will say, oh, and they're using Hegelian terms as translated into English. Well, it's not English, it's Greek. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that's what you get, synthesis. So thesis is an argument. Antithesis is counter argument. And then you have this beautiful blend in the context of decay, which we can now start to see as absolute justice, not the judgment of a dysfunctional king in the heroic age, but now absolute justice. And here's where this is such a wonderful thing, dear Keith, as you know, because we've done this together a few years earlier, is how in the Odyssey, when Odysseus finally reconnects with his ancestors by way of reconnecting with his father, the reconnection happens in a garden, in a beautiful garden, which is perfectly tended. And a perfectly tended garden is the ultimate symbol, I can say that way, I can say metaphor for absolute justice, because justice is a perfect garden. If you want to say it in terms of Judeo-Christian traditions, paradise, which is really an Iranian tradition. Iranian tradition is what paradise goes back to. So heaven on earth, so to speak, a projected heaven on earth. And that's what happens when Athena, this wonderful goddess of synthesis, says, I am your gardener. And I say, wow, that's what tragedy should be, is that fundamental lesson that the goddess of intellect, the goddess that we're all pinning our hopes on, it says, if you in Athens as a democracy want to evolve into a perfect democracy, then you should let me be your gardener. And of course, without the end of the Odyssey, which we must also never walk away from, where you have the perfect garden and the perfect meeting of generations, where finally Odysseus reconnects with all his previous generations through his father, and then connects forward in time to generations to come that are post-heroic. Then it's all there. It's all there.
Wow. I think that's a powerful place for us to end our discussion today. I don't know how we're going to beat
Agree.
that, to be honest.
How Athena turns a haunted house into a condominium where everyone is living, peacefully together,
Yeah,
ideally.
And you know what, Keith? Arin and I did flash that picture that Holly took of me standing in
Good.
front of the cave of the Eumenides at the foot of the Acropolis, where at that point they didn't yet have it barricaded away from tourists. So I could stand right in front of the cave of the Furies, excuse me, not Furies, ones with good intentions, the Eumenides. And there I am with my silly notebook. And I was wearing, I think, yesterday exactly what I wore back when I was there with Holly, and Holly took that picture that you and I like to show. Maybe, oh, there it is. Oh my God. And there's the cave of the Furies behind me. And wow.
I love this picture, and the students love this picture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well,
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
Claudia's right. That is a great place to end for now, and we'll pick it up again next time. So
Wonderful to see all of
thanks to
you.
you all for this conversation.
Wow.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. So Claudia, can you call on two people who've actually traveled with Greg in travel study and have actually had the experience of seeing the cave of the Eumenides before it was barricaded off for tourists? And I hope we have enough time for both Sarah and Hélène. I forget which of you saw it first and who saw it second, to talk not only about your impression of the cave of the Eumenides, but in general, your overall last word for today, or should I say latest word, about the Oresteia trilogy. Who wants to go first? Who wants to go second? Or you can interchange.
Oh, well, I guess I was the first one because I took the trip in 2017. But for me, the Oresteia is special because I first translated, I first read in Greek, in ancient Greek at university. And the first tragedy that I read was the Agamemnon. So to me, it was a very, very bloody play. It was really very difficult in Greek too. So I'm very happy that with you, Greg, when we travel, we the focus was more on the Eumenides, and
Yes.
seeing that cave with you there was just awesome, awesome, because it's really a positive ending to these three dramas, and it's beautiful to see the real place and the place where the Eumenides are staying.
Oh, yes. And Sarah.
Well, I don't think I can improve on what Hélène said, but also thinking about that whole area as a complete complex. And so where there's the tragedies would have been performed is in a similar area. And so there's all those interconnecting places and spaces. And we had a choral passage just now, and the young chorus were the young citizens learning to be Athenian citizens through this medium. So all of that seemed to come together when we think about tragedy in those actual places. So that's my impression.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And speaking, of who comes first, who comes second, and you can see dear ones out there that generations don't matter. It's the intergenerationality. It doesn't matter that Hélène had an experience first and Sarah had an experience later, or that I had some further experiences still later, and hope to continue to do so. But I think this is the time that maybe, Claudia, you and I, and here we're representing Keith, who is such an important colleague in working with a person who I hope will be my successor in leading a travel study, and that is Naomi Weiss, who is currently the chair of the classics department at Harvard University. And I'm getting to the stage where I'm not sure how many times I can still climb up the citadel of Mycenae or visit the cave of the Eumenides, even though the view is slightly blocked off for tourists now. But the reason I mention Naomi is, to me, she is the embodiment of intergenerational continuity, where travel study, as you, dear Hélène, and you, dear Sarah, and I experienced together, and that picture proves it, that we were there. And I love videos of you, Sarah, at Mycenae, and I'm still tracking down videos of you, dear Hélène, at other parts in our travel study adventures together. But I'm saying it's so reassuring and life affirming for me that I have a vigorous young colleague like Naomi Weiss, who understands Greek tragedy, and she's one of the world-class experts in Greek tragedy, and that she is, how to put it, the designator, let's try that again, who is the designated successor to me, and we're already partnering actually together in our travel study program. I think it would be wonderful if you, Claudia, and you, Keith, could maybe even show this video to Naomi, because I think she would have very pertinent comments, since she has also been a fellow traveler, and not this past spring, but the previous spring. But the previous spring, Naomi and I were there on the Acropolis, and then she led us through the theater of Dionysus and explained the setting for Athenian State Theater. And Keith already has, for example, a wonderful dialogue that has been videographed with Naomi, where Naomi talks about the theater of Dionysus, Athenian State Theater, the importance of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides as the eventually canonical state poets of tragedy. So what I hope is that, since you, dear Claudia, and you, dear Keith, are, shall we say, hosts of these wonderful events, that we can persuade Naomi to react to the dialogues that we've had and continue the dialogue with you all.
Wonderful, absolutely. Keith has stepped away, but yes, absolutely, we can share this result and hopefully create more dialogue. We'd love to have her join us. We had talked about that as an option earlier, a few months back, but she was very busy at the time, was what we had discussed.
Yes, but we must make it happen. And she is so collegial and so generous that I can almost boldly predict that it will happen.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This was a fabulous discussion, and I really appreciate your time today. So until next week.
Yeah, I won't be here next week, unfortunately. But...
Oh, okay, Sarah, we'll miss you.
Yeah, I'll
but
miss
don't
it.
worry, Sarah. Don't worry, Sarah.
That.
There you go. Exactly. It's the wonderful mentality of return, of eternal return.